being a catalyst. That is basically saying, hey, I have in my tool set a whole bunch of different ways to think differently about not only what you want to accomplish, but how you're going to think about the tools that you already know and have, and then how to simplify that down to something that's going to be so valuable. You're going to learn a lot from something as dumb as 2 boxes, a line, and 2 words.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And I'm thrilled today to have my good friend, George White, with us here. Hi, George.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm excited
For listeners, our conversations are always super fun. I'm super excited. Exactly. George is the director at Slalom and former chief innovation officer at Katina. He also is an adjunct at Mass Art, where he teaches prototyping. He's worked on a wide range of products and services. I love these examples, from 401k providers to internet connected dog collars. He's also the board chair of the Co-Design Collaborative. And you cannot have a conversation with George without learning something and being, a little bit provocative. So thrilled to have you. But that's just this baby intro. I'd love to hear your journey and your words in a way that might share your catalytic nature along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was destined to do something catalytic probably from the very beginning. I've always been kind of, catalysts are interesting, right? They drive change, but they don't get consumed themselves by that change. And I think I was always that way. I was reflecting the other day on a memory I have of being, I think it was first grade, and the teacher's reading to the class and me crawling off to go read a comic book, right, or something that was like more interesting to me. I've always been kind of a little bit different, a little bit focused on different things. I think I see things a little bit different than folks do, and that's been good and bad from a catalytic perspective. It's both helped me make the progress I've made, it's helped me help others make progress, but at the same time, it's also set me apart. Sometimes it sets me outside, and I think so. One of the challenges always is figuring out how to bring myself in line enough while still keeping that catalytic behavior. And I think that's always been an interesting challenge. So happy to talk more about the exact journey, but I think that's how I think about it broadly.
I love that last piece. And I guess maybe just share with us then a time or two along your way where that's been a challenge and how you've dealt with it.
Oh yeah, so I've got a lot of those. But I actually remember one very specific thing where there was at a company I was at a few years ago, there was a sort of an idea that we were going to go ahead and create some new change in product. And I was very, very, very much against it. And I had a very, very clear idea of why I was against it. And I remember in the meeting, people kept saying, yeah, but, and I kept saying, yeah, but no. And I realized that I was trying to direct them in a new way of thinking about what they were doing. Not saying no, but saying, okay, I see what you're saying, but there's a better way to accomplish your thing. And I got very, very heated about their particular way of thinking about it. And I remember afterwards, I went to several people who were in the meeting and I apologized for my, being overly heated about this thing. And several of them were like, I get it. You're just trying to redirect us and try to think about it. You're really trying to catalyze what, the change we want. I'm like, yes, absolutely. And then I went to some other person. She said, no, you're so smart and you're so capable. We really appreciate it. And we really just need to help us figure out how to make it the thing we want to have happen. I went, no, you misunderstand. I'm apologizing for my attitude about how I tried to change what you're thinking. I'm not trying to apologize for trying to change your thinking. So that's one of those things where I think it's come up a lot. I also think there's a lot of things where I had something the other day happen where I was in a meeting with a client and we were expressing sort of how to talk about desirability, viability, feasibility in their products and what could happen there. And at one point, I'd laid out several different models on this huge whiteboard they had in their office, and all of which trying to, again, get her to think differently about exactly how her product could go to market. And some of these were very clear things of sort of lining up the feature set with the customer need and lining up the value with the way the customers want to do things, and all that very and I love frameworks, by the way. For anyone who's ever met me, and Shen, this about me. I think in metaphors and I love frameworks. I want to hang all my thinking off of models.
I would
But
say you
anyway,
have encyclopedic knowledge about frameworks, and yeah.
I try. Although I'm starting to center down on a few that really matter to me. And actually, one of the ones you mentioned, my adjunct course at Mass Art, is around prototyping, and there's a framework called the Houde model of prototyping. And basically, it answers the question, what do prototypes prototype? Essentially, it breaks the world down to three things: roles, look and feel, and implementation, all of which head towards integration. All of this is basically to say, when you're asking a question with a prototype, right? All prototypes are used to design things. You want to know which of these areas, generally speaking, it's in. And it may be some overlap, right? It may be something that's look and feel and role, which is really about like what it's for. In other words, what does the audience need and what do you want to build feature set wise and everything. Some may be more look and feel and implementation, more implementation like, oh, is it made of metal or wood? That kind of thing. Anyway, I had said to myself at the beginning of this, when I was laying out all these different frameworks, I'm not going to put the Houde model in there. And then late in the conversation, the customer said, yeah, but I really want to know what my customers are doing. And I said, oh, okay. Well, and now I have to show you the Houde model. And I started to show it to her, and she said, okay, that's great. And I get look and feel, I get implementation, but what's role? I don't understand role. And almost nobody ever gets role the first time. And I said, okay, so the way you tend to think about prototypes is probably you're going to build a prototype, and then you're going to give it to your customer, and they're going to validate something for you. But what if you change that relationship around? What if they gave you a prototype and you learned from that about what their hopes and dreams are? And she went, oh, okay, wait. So I said, all right, how about this? For your thing, which let's just say that it involved a large language model chatbot, essentially. I said, well, how about this? How about your prototype is, and I drew two boxes, one line and two words. The outer box was the sheet of the whole interface. The line had the word prompt next to it, and then the word result underneath that with that second box. And I said, what you do is you go to your customer and you say, write your prompt for me. Tell me what you would ask this machine. I don't need to know if the machine really works or not. I just need you to tell me what you would say. And then draw for me what the machine resulted in telling you. Write that out too. And now, even with that just simple piece of paper, you've learned a lot about what your customers' needs are, how they think and what they want to do, and what's going to happen. And she said, you know, and I'm going to sound like I'm patting myself on the back here. I'm not. But she said, oh, that's brilliant. I say all this in that extended story I just told to say that is being a catalyst. That is basically saying, hey, I have in my tool set a whole bunch of different ways to think differently about not only what you want to accomplish, but how you're going to think about the tools that you already know and have, and then how to simplify that down to something that's going to be so valuable. You're going to learn a lot from something as dumb as two boxes, a line, and two words. That to me is a big driver of sort of that catalytic behavior is really being able to move up and down the ladder of abstraction to be able to say, hey, I've got some really interesting thoughts. Well, not interesting. I have some thoughts. And then being willing to expose your thoughts. So actually, like I said, not necessarily interesting thoughts, but when your mind goes down interesting paths or different paths you find interesting, share that with others. That is a driver of being a catalyst, is saying, hey, I've just got a different thought that's in here. Maybe let's see if we can explore it together.
One clarifying question, Houde, how do you spell, what is the Houde model? I've never heard of it.
H-O-U-D-E.
H-O-U-D, okay.
And it can be found in a paper online called What Do Prototypes Prototype?
Awesome. I want to go back. It's sort of like a circular question. I want to go back because I think it's so, it's such a good insight and description. You're like, I sort of had one foot out, I was on the edge and one foot inside. And that's like where catalysts, that's what you're talking about, this tension of, I'm scanning out here, I'm learning all of these different things. I need to be able to bring it back into my customer, my organization, whatever. And you shared a story, which I love, which deeply resonates with me about like how we cannot do that well sometimes and like pull away. So I'm wondering if you have examples or tools that you've used to navigate that balance and not go too far in one direction, and important to bring people along on the journey, because no matter how right we are, if they've all left the room and they're never going to talk to us again, it doesn't really matter, right?
Well, so I think part of the reason I like frameworks so much is frameworks help me to explain what I'm thinking. Right, my brain goes all over the place all the time. I mean, you might have even heard it in this call, right? I had to dive way down into that model to come all the way back to finish telling my story. So my brain is moving all the time in all sorts of interesting things. My thoughts are not linear. Nobody's thoughts are really linear, but I know as you and I've discussed actually in the past, I know enough about my own thinking to know that my thoughts aren't leaders. So for me, the frameworks are a tool to direct my thoughts and theirs. They basically are a model that sits between us to facilitate communication. And when I haven't had those frameworks, when I haven't had that moment of being able to run to the whiteboard or pull out a piece of paper or just be able to take the moment to illustrate, I think that's when there's the most disconnection. So I think that's actually one of the reasons why I do it. And I think the same thing is true with the metaphors. Is I'm thinking something and it's easier to give someone a parallel, right? An analogy or a metaphor or something else that helps them to connect their known experience to the new world experience. Again, that inside outside piece. And so as we spend all of our time as catalysts, often absorbing lots of information and synthesizing that information, sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, but constantly and always bringing that information. Every catalyst I've ever met is a information gatherer. They are all constantly trying to learn and gather so many things. They're all fascinated by learning new things. We then channel that into how do we turn that into something? And you need a good way to you need a process or a structure to do that, because otherwise you'll be all over the place. So I think that's one way that I've sort of helped myself and others to achieve the goals I have for them.
Yeah, it's a powerful combination. I remember one of our first conversations when you joined the Catalyst Leadership Trust was storytelling, and you're masterful at like bringing the frameworks to elucidate the thing that you're talking about. But even as you were doing that, you were packaging that up in a story about how you were using the framework. And I'm curious, like, because even sometimes when we do that, our visions can be too big for people, or there's still like they're not connecting. Their non-catalyst brain is not necessarily connecting. I'm just wondering what it feels like to have a place where you can be with people where their brains are working at speed with you.
Yeah, it's a good question. And oh, by the way, sorry, podcast listeners, there's a possibility you might be hearing my dog barking in the background. If you are, she's just excited about this podcast. Yeah, so sorry, say that again. So really about the thought of sort of thinking about how I think about getting people into sort of that same thinking that same speed with me.
Well, I mean, it's like we often don't have a lot of people in our organizations who are moving at that speed. So I'm just wondering, like, how, how important is it for you to have people where you can just be like, oh my God, I don't have to slow down. I don't have to dumb it down.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. And in fact, actually, the biggest professional challenge I have is finding people to play with. Actually, I don't really like that term. Well, first off, you know me well enough to know that I like talking about play. I think play is essential to the job that we do as catalysts. But playmates sounds somewhat infantilizing, and this isn't. There is a childish aspect of this. There's a childhood, embracing that creativity of childhood that matters. But we're doing something as adults here, and so let's actually use a slightly different term. I think collaboration is vital to all major things that people do, right? It's what society is built on. A big frustration for me as a catalyst is finding those collaborators who are able to move at the speed I want to, as you said, who are willing to actually express their ideas as openly as I'm willing to express my ideas. They're willing to sort of play in that same sandbox of space that I'm willing to play in. But actually, for me, what I found is I need people who are better transitioners between sort of the normal pace of things and what I do. So if you think about it as I'm very good at thinking about how we go far, I need somebody who can go with me, but not so far that they can't pull back and actually say, wait a minute, how are we going to bring this into the rest of the organization that may be not moving at our speed? So finding that set of collaborators. And I've always felt that is really important to have that set of peers. When I was at Cantina, I really didn't enjoy being a manager, but I loved being able to help lead teams. And my job there wasn't really to actually pull them to something or push them to something. It was to support them in achieving our shared goals. And so building up teams that have that, where we've got a lot of people that can work together to achieve those goals. And I'm just there to kind of like, hey, nudge a little bit, maybe sometimes get out front a little bit, but always be collaborating. That's key. So yeah, that's probably my single biggest frustration is when I'm not in environments where that exists. I have not done as well when that lacks. And actually, it's part of the reason why I in the Catalyst Leadership Trust, the CLT reminds me of many of those things, and it actually gives me people who understand those challenges and can give me some very clear ideas of exactly how I can continue to build that team.
Yeah, it can be so lonely, right? But I love where you landed at the end about that, because especially as we're coming up, we're taught by society like you should be headed up this hierarchical thing to achieve greatness.
Hmm.
And part of that is usually if you have to become a manager of people and all of the things. But I liked the twist that you had. And I'm wondering if you have advice for like, up and coming catalysts where it's like, you were talking earlier about the difference between leadership and management. And it's like, you can be a leader without managing the directly, the
Hmm.
role. And I think it's a role that catalysts often find themselves in, but it's not a place that we get a lot of training, like how to lead without having the manager role. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for
Yeah. So this is a good place to talk about sort of organizational structures a little bit, and maybe actually one of my favorite metaphors for this, which is Gordon McKenzie's pyramid in the plum tree. So McKenzie in his book Orbiting the Giant Hairball talks a little bit about sort of the traditional structure. Many people think of management as sort of pyramidal. The management, CEOs and the executive team at the top, middle management, basically the people who are truly managers, right? Whose job is to take the directives from the CEO and the rest of the C-suite and the executive team and then make it happen, and then workers at the bottom. And McKenzie points out that this is sort of dry and dusty and dead, like all pyramids, right? And stuff rolls downhill, and nobody really wants that. And basically, people at the bottom of the organization are always wondering why they're doing the things they're doing. Middle managers are kind of caught in this weird position between leadership who has vision theoretically, and I usually scare quotes, folks, for those who can't see this. But and the middle managers are trying to like basically make sure the metrics are getting met. And McKenzie inverts this and he talks about the plum tree, a living organization where management's actually the roots at the bottom of it. The leadership is at the roots, and the true management structure, the middle managers are really the trunk of that thing. They're supporting it. And then all the workers and all the people who are getting stuff done on the line are all the leaves and flowers and things that the tree produces. And the whole goal of that thing is basically to sort of move nutrients in. The growth comes from those leaves, right? The photosynthesis is what's really creating the energy for that whole thing to work. And I love that metaphor. For catalysts, here's a challenge. Because of who we are and how we think and what we do, it's very, very rare for us to rise to the very top. If you think about that pyramid structure of an organization, it's really, really rare. We're not good as a general class at being the CEOs or CTOs of a business. We might be chief innovation officers, and occasionally you'll have a finance officer show up as a catalyst. It does happen, but it's very rare. And so if you're not at the very top and you can't be in that vision setting thing in a traditional sort of pyramid structure, you end up being sort of at the bottom of the top, or at the top of the middle, if you will. You usually will rise to a level of not just being a line manager. You'll actually be someone who will be put in charge of something, an innovation team, or some sort of new initiatives, or something to help drive creativity in the organization. And that's great, except that you're still subordinate to that top level vision and you don't get as much chance to influence it. So in that traditional pyramid structure, catalysts are in a very rough place because we're not managers, but we're in with the managers. And so I say all this to say that what really needs to happen is we need to change our way of thinking, both as catalysts and actually or as organizations as a whole, is saying, let's relook at the role, like with the plum tree metaphor. So relook at the role of middle management as actually a way of bringing that energy and those nutrients in place. And yeah, you're there to make sure the structure of the tree still exists. Like a trunk holds the whole tree up, right? But part of your job is to help to move things up and down. And if that's the case, then now it becomes much easier for catalysts to fit in, because now everybody isn't a catalyst, but everyone is invested in this growth of the organization. Rather than structurally holding it up and trying to force things downhill, we're actually all seeing it's a two-way flow, and now it becomes much more natural.
I totally buy into that. How do we find the organizations that are using the plum tree model instead of the pyramid model?
Okay, so unfortunately, we have to create them. And that's going to be hard for us as catalysts, and for everybody to do, because it's not always a natural structure, for human beings. We like hierarchical structures. There's reason for command and control and all these other things. But it's not the only structure we have. There are other ways to think about it. There's, sorry, I'm going to say the Western capitalist way of doing it, which is like there's a boss and the boss is in charge and the boss provides incentives in the form of pay and then workers do this stuff. I have always felt for years, and whenever I say this to people, the first time I say it, many people look at me like I'm basically jumping on a soapbox and talking about socialism or something. But in an organization, everyone pays everyone else. I don't care if you're the CEO or the janitor. Your work, if it is in any way aligned with the business, and it should be, is work that will make that business productive. So some portion of your salary, whether you're making $30,000 a year or $3 million a year, is being divided up. All the work that you create is being divided up to actually pay everybody else. So we're all in this together. So we have to create organizations that understand that we're all in this together. So we need to be focused on impact. What is the organization going to be? And that has to be everybody in the organization understands what the impact is meant to be. We have to be focused on the outcomes that we want to drive. What are the things that we want that will make that impact happen? Impact is and outcomes are often confused as being the same thing. They're not. Impact is the change you want to see in the world. Outcomes are the things that do or do not drive that impact. I can go and do something in my organization, build a new technology platform or something like that, and there'll be an outcome, but if it doesn't achieve the next set of impact, if it doesn't further the direction of the arrow of impact, then it was useless. Not useless, but it was not in line with the impact I intend to have. And so impact and outcomes, all the things you build, all the outputs you build, and all the inputs you have all have to be aligned. And if they're aligned, then those organizations will be there. So finding those organizations is looking for organizations that are led by impact, that are led by a true purpose, and they have leaders who understand purpose. If you're a catalyst, you're going to love that job because that person will put you in place. Remember, to be the catalyst. You're not consumed by this thing, but you're going to drive something. You will absolutely love a purpose-driven organization. If you are in an organization that is less certain about its purpose, catalysts will almost always find that to be miserable quickly. And what we'll do is we'll spend all of our time not focused actually on the external part of how do we make the organization achieve its impact better. We're actually going to focus our energy on internal stuff because we're going to try and make that organization purpose-led so that it can achieve its impact. And I'm telling on myself because this is how I feel right now about my current role is that I'm spending a lot of my time, more of my time probably than I should, on what happens inside my business and less on outside my business.
Oh my God, it's so true. Okay, but so does that mean that we all have to like find the Patagonias and Unilevers of the world to be happy? Or like how can we see from the outside as we're like, okay, where am I going to bring my catalytic superpowers to next, where I'm going to align enough with the organization that I'm going to be successful and feel fulfilled?
So if you're blessed enough to be able to find a truly purpose-driven organization and go work there, it's great. That's awesome. And do that and enjoy it while you do it. But also remember as catalysts that while everybody, like we're all like all human beings and that we seek satisfaction, there is a point where we also want to drive change. And that means we have to leave those safe harbors. We have to go out into those organizations where it's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. It's going to suck to be out there trying to drive change in those organizations. But we don't have a choice. We're going to do it. We're going to get dissatisfied, sadly, with staying in an organization that is just all right. Right? There's not enough challenge, frankly, in many of those businesses for the long haul. And so I guess the answer is no, we're not only exclusively looking for those things, but we are looking to create, if we could move the 90% of businesses that are not truly purpose driven. And I know that sounds harsh, but I'm pretty sure that that's right. Most businesses are driven by motives that are only thinly veiled in purpose. If we are truly dedicated to the world I think that we want to have, the change we want to have, then I think we need to create the environment for ourselves. And that means going back into that 90% and making 10% of that more like this. Yeah. And that even would be a huge thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I was just telling this story to someone yesterday about like when I was going to the Presidio graduate school and working on the green MBA, and like so many of those people were doing social enterprise, which is great. and they would be, and like the idea of working with a GE or a Walmart was like abhorrent. But I was like, 1% change in those organizations
Yeah.
going to blow away anything that a small social impact social enterprise is going to do.
Absolutely. The levers that you need to, if you're okay, so if you want to affect a big thing, a global issue like climate change, you're probably not going to do that at a small local level. I mean, this is the thing. It's almost a corollary to the whole individual action isn't really going to affect. You can recycle all you want. I'm sorry, but it's probably not going to add up to the total amount of change that we want. We need to affect the bigger levers. There's a large range of motion to be had, whether we're talking about something like climate change or DE&I or you know, advancing business, new technologies. I don't care what it is. If you want to affect change, you're better off trying to put more weight on the big levers than trying to get the individual small things to add up. As an individual. Not, and by the way, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have community organizations. I'm not saying that you can't grow a community into something big that becomes that thing, but it would be easier for us as catalysts to go to those social organizations, try and get them to change ultimately than it would be to try and just only do the ground up thing.
There's an interesting thread through this conversation that I really appreciate, which is like it's almost like a weaving in and out, like walking that knife's edge that you were talking about at the beginning. It's like, I'm in, but I'm always different. One of the things that you started to touch on was how few of us make it to the executive level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, partly we're called troublemakers and disruptors for a reason, but you managed to get to a chief innovation officer role. So I'm thinking what advice do you have for people to overcome some of the challenges that we bring as catalysts to get into those executive roles?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, part of the reason I ended up in that role was because I had a CEO who recognized that what I was doing, I actually came into that company originally sort of more as a technical role, more as a technical architecture role. And at one point, he actually promoted someone else into a role very similar to mine. And at that point, he actually made me, I think it was the SVP of innovation, and then before I was chief innovation officer. And I said, okay, sure, whatever. And me being me, I'm like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. Titles or whatever, man. Just, sure, why not? And at the time, there were no VPs or SVPs in this business. It was a relatively small business at the time. And he promoted me to this VP level. So I became the first, VP in this business. And he did say, I need to explain to you why this is. What you're doing is different than what this other person I'm promoting to a role that looks like yours, that we hired you for, is doing. And so part of what we're doing as Catalyst is we should be scouting for people who understand what we do, who are not us necessarily, but are looking for people like us to shake things up a little bit. And really recognizing that there's a collaboration. And I want to be clear, that CEO, who I love like a brother, we fought every day. Every single day. There are legends of how much she and I fought. But we both always understood each other, and we always understood what we were trying to do. Even when we didn't agree, we could actually have the conversation. So finding those people who can goes back to the collaboration theme, finding people who can collaborate with you to challenge you. But also recognize that you're not being a troublemaker. You're there because of a genuine drive and desire to see change lead to better impact. That is the difference between an arsonist and a catalyst. Arsonists just want to burn everything down. They love change because they love to see things fall apart. Where a catalyst really wants to build things up and really wants to drive things. Now, that's not to say that sometimes a catalyst isn't accidentally an arsonist, right?
Yes.
We sometimes come in and we break shit really badly, and we shake things up, and then we're not aware of how badly we've broken things. So that's the other part of it, is find someone in that management team and know this about yourself, that you might be on the path of breaking things, and get someone who is your check. I have had part of the reason I've succeeded for most of my career is I've always had a partner in my business. Years ago, it was my friend Maureen O'Donnell, for instance, who was always, again, more practically minded me and always able to say, wait a minute, you're about to set something on fire. I know you think this is a good idea. I'm not saying it isn't, but maybe just take a step back and ask yourself, am I setting something on fire or am I building something new?
I love that. And I'm going to tie it back to something that you said earlier, and maybe you want to provide additional commentary on this. But here you were sort of talking about a leader who sees your value, who understands you, who isn't afraid to challenge you because they know that they're going to get productive output towards their vision. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that can help us get to that C-suite or executive level to help us overcome some of the arsonist
Mm-hmm.
tendencies we might have. But also earlier you talked about, this wasn't your word, this is my word, but like a translator. You're like someone who can
Yeah.
help me bring it back into the organization. Is that a fair synopsis of what you've been talking about?
Absolutely. Translation is really key. I think that runs through a few things that, like when earlier we're talking about frameworks. Framework is a form of translation.
Yeah.
What's in my head, what's in your head, can we get them out in between us and then see how they fit?
Yeah.
Right. And then, yeah, having that human being to help you translate what you're doing and refine your thinking. Because another thing, let's be honest, catalysts are often systems thinkers. We're very good at seeing and identifying and understanding the complexity of a system. But there's a problem with that too, which is we see it all, right? It's like that famous, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. There's Charlie Day is up there and he's explaining thing, and there's a gif of this of him like and there's like all the lines and we all know that board, right? That vision of like yarn everywhere. That's often what's in our brains is all this yarn everywhere. And so, when we're like, this is why so many catalysts are consultants, I think, is because, or fit into a certain level of consultancy, because we do naturally see the world in grays. We see it as interconnections, and we see all these things, and we follow all these things, and we can happily follow them down these divergences and everything else. And sometimes you need someone to go, stop following divergences. Make this simpler. Come back to it. I know it's in there. I just need you to pull it together, buddy. And so that translator is a translator and a coach. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be the leader, your boss. Sometimes it can be a partner, but it's always going to be somebody. It's maybe somebody outside, right? The CLT is a good place for that, where people will go, "Hey, man, like come to the CLT and tell them what your problem is." And quite often you get advice like, "Hey, you're just being a catalyst. Stop being a catalyst just for a minute and come back to reality." So I think that's translator is exactly it. Wherever you can get that, it's vital.
And I think you're so good at that. All right. I could talk to you forever. I love your storytelling, but we have our last final question. Who
All
is
right.
your favorite inspirational catalyst, past or present, and why?
This question, I was thinking about this question when you guys asked me to do this podcast, and I have no great answer for this. But actually, I was trying to think of like, who's a big figure out there in the world, someone who, and like, I really like the thinking of George E.P. Box. My favorite quote is actually a misquote of his, but it's all models are wrong, some are useful. Real quote's closer to something like, having stated that all models are in some way incorrect, the main question is, how wrong must they be before they are no longer useful? I think that's a beautiful thing, and I love that. I quote it all the time. It's great. But
You said
actually,
the name really fast. I didn't catch the name.
George E.P. Box. He was a statistician. Did a lot of work. I think between him and Gödel is probably all the people you need to think about the fact that everything you're thinking is just a model of the universe. The universe exists. It's as we've often talked about, it's VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Real human beings like to be linear, anthropocentric, mechanistic, and ordered. They're lame-o, right? But again, even those are models, right? Not everybody's like that, and everybody works that way. So EP Box, George EP Box is probably my favorite. But actually, I think my answer is going to be really sappy. It's probably my mom. My mother is an amazing person who has done a ton of different things over her career, and she set me up. She recognized that kid from first grade, going all the way back to the beginning, that kid from first grade who was thinking that way. She recognized that it wasn't me being distracted or weird. She recognized that this was me thinking differently and encouraged that different thinking. And I think that is what set me up on the path for catalysts.
So sorry about that.
No worries.
What's your mom's name?
Barbara White. She is just on the path to retiring after several decades of doing all sorts of things, everything from being a personal trainer to a CPA to working for Digital Equipment Corporation to help figure out finance. She has been a consultant herself for the last several decades, and a coach. And she is, whenever I have to figure something out, I love you guys at the CLT, but the person who really, really, I mean, it's not like a total mama's boy, but the person who really helps clarify for things for me my whole life has always been my mother.
I love that so much. Thank you, Barbara. We really love having George on this planet, solving all the problems that he's solving. So thank you for the gift of your son. George, thank you so much. That was an amazing conversation as always.
Thank you, Shannon. My pleasure.
Also, I just have to say that was my mom calling, so I'm a mama's girl too. To our listeners, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.